when I first arrived at the Petrov estate. The piano was the first thing I noticed, not the marble floors or the chandelier that hung like a frozen storm above the foyer, not the smell of lemon polish that coated every corner of the house, or the way the sunlight crawled through the tall windows like it was afraid to touch anything too rich. No, what caught my eye was the piano. It sat near the back wall of the living room, black, grand, perfect, a Steinway, the kind my mother used to dream about when we lived in Odessa. Before the war, before the border crossings, before everything changed. Its lid was half open, the keys catching the morning light. I could see the fine layer of dust on them, like time had stopped right there, waiting for someone brave enough to make it move again. I wanted to touch it, but I didn't in that house. Even the air had rules. Mrs. Petrov was the one who interviewed me. She was elegant in the way that makes you want to stand straighter without knowing why. A diamond bracelet glittered at her wrist, reflecting the same cold light as her smile. She asked where I was from, and when I said Ukraine, she raised her eyebrows slightly, as if I had admitted to something shameful. Do you have experience in domestic service? She asked. Yes, ma'am. In Poland first, and then here. Cleaning, ironing, child care. She made a note on her tablet. We'll start with cleaning and laundry. My husband works late, my daughter studies piano. You'll make sure she has everything she needs. You'll be paid weekly cash. We expect discretion, punctuality, and respect for property. Understood? Yes, ma'am, I said again. She didn't smile this time. And one more thing. Do not touch the piano, ever. It's my husband's rule. I nodded. Though my eyes betrayed me, they had already wandered back toward it. The first week passed quietly. The house was a map of silence. I woke before dawn, washed the tiled floors that shone like mirrors, ironed linen so white they could have blinded me, and made sure every object sat in the exact position it had been in before I arrived. It was a strange thing, cleaning a place that already looked perfect, like trying to erase fingerprints from a ghost. Mr. Petrov, I soon learned, was a man who spoke in short sentences and long silences. A composer once, they said, before business swallowed his music. Now he worked in real estate and investment. His office was near the piano room, but he never looked toward it. Their daughter, Anna, was 12, quiet, serious, pale as porcelain, always practicing scales that sounded more like punishment than music. She played the same exercise every morning, her fingers marching over the keys like soldiers on command. When she made a mistake, her mother's voice would come from another room again, Anna, and she would start over. Sometimes, when I brought tea or polished the glass shelves, I caught her looking at me with curious eyes that wanted to ask something but were too afraid to speak. It wasn't until the third week that I stayed late enough to hear the piano in the dark. Mr. Petrov had guests, business partners with loud laughter and expensive cologne. I'd been told to serve drinks, which meant moving like a shadow through rooms filled with noise. When they left, the house grew heavy again. Mrs. Petrov went upstairs, her heels clicking like a metronome. I stayed to tidy up the glasses, and then I heard it. Not the mechanical, lifeless scales Anna played, but something real, soft at first, like rain tracing glass, then deeper, stronger, chords that felt like they had been waiting years to breathe. It was the piano, and it was her. Anna was playing in the dark. I stood in the doorway, half hidden, not wanting to break the spell. The melody was uneven, emotional, uncertain, the sound of a heart learning to speak. When she stopped, she turned and saw me. I'm sorry, I whispered. She smiled, small and shy. You play, don't you? I froze. Why do you say that? The way you listened, she said simply. Only people who play listen like that. I wanted to deny it, but the truth was already rising inside me. I used to, I said. Before what? I didn't answer. She looked down at the keys. They don't like when I play what I feel, she said. Only what's written. I nodded. I understood too well. Maybe you could teach me? She asked quietly. The question felt dangerous, not because of her tone, but because of how much I wanted to say yes. I shook my head. Your mother would not approve. She never does, she said. The next morning, I found a folded note on the kitchen counter. It was written in pencil, in small, careful letters. After lessons today, will you stay a little? Just to listen, please. I hid the note in my apron pocket and told myself I wouldn't go. But that night, when the house went quiet and the moon fell through the window like spilled milk, I found myself standing beside the piano again. Anna was waiting. Play with me, she said. I can't. You can. Her voice was so certain it made me believe I still could. And when I sat down, my fingers trembled like they were remembering an old prayer. The first note cracked. The second found its voice. The third, it felt like breathing after years underwater. I played softly, afraid the sound might draw ghosts out of the walls. Anna followed my lead, matching my rhythm, laughing when we stumbled. The house, for the first time since I arrived, felt alive. When the last note faded, I realized I was crying. Anna looked at me with awe. That was beautiful. I smiled. No, that was free. We didn't hear Mrs. Petrov until it was too late. The light snapped on. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "What is this?" she hissed. I stood up so fast the bench scraped the floor. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It won't happen again." She walked toward the piano, her eyes blazing. "Did I not tell you never to touch it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then why did you?" "Because music doesn't wait for permission. Because sometimes silence hurts more than sign." But I said none of that. "I'm sorry," I whispered again. Her hand slammed against the piano lid. The sound like thunder. "Get out." Anna jumped. "Mama, please." It was me. "Enough," Mrs. Petrov snapped. "Upstairs now." Anna's eyes filled with tears. She didn't do anything wrong. Now, I turned to go, but Mrs. Petrov's voice followed me, sharp and final. "Pack your things. You're finished here." I walked out into the night with nothing but my coat and my silence. The moon followed me like a witness, and in the distance, behind those cold windows, I thought I heard it, one last note, faint but defiant, echoing from the piano we'd shared for one stolen song. I didn't know then that someone else had heard it too, that the night I was fired was the night my life would begin again.
I did not sleep the night I left the Petrov house. Sleep is for people whose hands are quiet. Mine were full of echoes. The melody we had found in school, imperfect. Rial kept running along the bones of my fingers like a secret trying to stay alive. I walked until the streetlights grew thin, and the city changed to the kind of silence that belongs to delivery trucks and stray cats. At the hostel, the night clerk slid me a key and didn't ask questions. That was its own kind of mercy. I lay on the narrow bed with my coat still on, a suitcase under my calves, and the smell of lemon polish still in my hair, and watched a square of light crawl across the cracked ceiling while I tried to swallow the feeling that I had been cut loose from a life I hadn't even finished entering. When morning came, it felt like a judgment, rather than a beginning. I boiled water in the communal kitchen and held the cup between my palms until the heat convinced my skin to stay. A woman at the table asked in Polish if I was new. I nodded. Some truths are easier in a language that reminds you you've survived more than this. She told me about work at a laundry 2 tram stops away. I told her I would go. I did go. Later, they said to leave a number, and they would call if the ironing needed more hands. I left the number of a phone whose minutes I rationed like bread. On my way back, I passed a small church whose doors are always cracked in winter to let in the kind of people who need light without questions. I stepped inside to warm my fingertips. The church was empty except for a man snoring softly in the last pew and a cluster of candles doing their best to imitate stars. There was an upright piano against the side wall, its varnish scarred, a lace cloth folded back from the keys, like a shrug. A handwritten sign taped above it said, "For prayer only." I smiled at that. Music had always been the only prayer I understood completely. I sat, lifted the cloth, and let one note bloom under my finger middle C, shy and honest, then another, then the same to the left, the same to the right. The piano was out of tune, just enough to tell the truth. I played what I could remember from the night before, not the scales Anna is forced to practice, those belong to obedience, but the shape we had built from the throat of the room. It was small at first, 2 steps forward, 1 back, but then my hands remembered their own story, and I followed them. I did not hear the door until it closed. Someone stood in the aisle, not moving. I kept playing because stopping would have felt like lying. When the phrase ended, I let it hang there and turned. It was not a priest. It was not a stranger. It was Mr. Petrov, without his armor. No jacket, no tie. The clothes of a man who had forgotten to dress for anything but urgency. Snow clung to his cuffs like he had walked fast without meeting the thought that was chasing him. "I thought I was imagining it," he said, almost to himself. "But it was you." The part of me that wants to apologize stood up first. "I wasn't. I didn't mean." He lifted his hand, not as a warning, but as if he were trying to catch something invisible between us. "Don't be sorry," he said. He stood there a moment, searching for a tone inside his own chest, then stepped closer. "Last night after you left the house was wrong. There are houses built entirely from rules. You know this, and you learn to live inside the geometry of them. But after you played, I kept hearing an aftermage resonance. It made the quiet louder." He smiled without his mouth. I walked the corridors like a guard who has misplaced the prisoner. I told myself it was a draft, or grief. He glanced at the candles, or God. "But it was your sound." I knew it. I folded the lace back over the keys because looking at them while hearing him would have been a betrayal to both. "I shouldn't have touched your instrument," I said. It felt important to offer that sacrifice aloud. He shook his head. "She fired you," he said simply, and the word she carried 30 winters. I know. I wanted to ask how. If the house itself tells on the wounded, if there is a smell to dismissal you cannot scrub from the air. He answered me without being asked. "Anna told me." There was a rush of air behind the name, like a held breath released. He rubbed his palm with his thumb, the way men do when they want to smooth down a memory. She woke me. She has never done that. She said, "Papa, I made music." And then she cried because the music cost you your job. She said you taught her a different kind of listening in 1 hour than all her lessons have in 2 years. I felt myself closing the way fists close around something too bright. I didn't teach her, I said. I only allowed her. There is a difference. He nodded, and I realized he knew that difference in his bones. There is, he said. Will you sit? I sat because my legs remembered what it means to obey a gentle ask. He took the bench beside me, not close enough to be a threat, close enough to hear how I breathe. He placed his left hand on the low keys and pressed 3, not in any order that would pass an exam, but in the order of hunger. The sound shivered, a floorboard 2 stories down. Do you know this? He asked. I did. The melody belongs to the Black Earth before the war. The one my mother would hum while boiling soup stretched thin across a week. It is older than our passports and kinder than our borders. I lifted it up and the broken piano offered its imperfect blessing, and for a moment the church was a kitchen. And we were not servant and master, exile and citizen, but 2 people who had once remembered how to be fluent in something the world could not monetize. Yes, he said, almost a laugh. Yes, when the last chord decided to stay. He folded his hands and looked at the little gold ring on my finger that isn't gold and isn't little. It is brass from a market, cheap as tomatoes, but I wear it because absence needs objects. Why did you stop? He asked softly. There are questions that ask for history, and questions that ask for confession. His asked for both. Because the building where I practiced fell. I said, because the teacher left. Because my mother needed tea from money that never came. Because the border took 2 years. Because in Poland the piano belonged to the daughter of the butcher, and in Berlin, it belonged to the dogs of a woman who thought pianos are tables. Because when I found a room with a keyboard, the man wanted a different kind of rent. My voice did not break. I have practiced that, because sometimes beauty costs dignity, and I could not afford that price. He closed his eyes. I watched his face become the face of a man who had not forgiven himself at all for the storage room full of scores he will never show his wife. When he opened them, he said, I was a composer once, before I decided to succeed. He smiled without humor. Do you know what it does to a man to take the roof money from the song? It builds a house and empties a room, I said. My mother taught me to run my hand along the walls of a sentence until you find the nail it hangs on. He looked at the ceiling, at saints with flaking paint, at cracks that have left their own sheet music across plaster. I wanted music that would outlive me. I settled for money that would not. He rose as if he remembered the world again and its obligations. I cannot fix the way my house is built, he said, but I can make a door. He reached into his coat and took out a card. Not the kind men give women in movies. The kind men give men when there is seriousness to be done. His thumb had pressed a deep arc into one corner. He set it on the fallboard. Come tonight, he said. 8. No one will be there but me. I will pay you to teach my daughter what you taught her last night. Your wife, I began, and he lifted the back of his hand the way musicians do when the rest is marked in the bar. You cannot make law of one person's fear, he said. It was not unkind. It was a man choosing cowardice to disobey for once. I cannot protect you forever from her. I can protect you tonight. Come. He left before I could refuse, as if refusal might travel sound faster than feet. When the door closed, the man in the last pew snored again, and the candles decided it was morning. I thought about the word protect long enough that it cooled. Then I tucked the card into the coin pocket of my coat, where I keep the lint of old countries. I went to the laundry and asked again, and they said maybe Tuesday. I bought bread I did not need and fed the birds in the park. Because mercy should be practiced on something that cannot thank you. I returned to the hostel and washed my blouse in the sink and ironed it under a towel with the flat bottom of a pot because a woman with a chance should not arrive to it wrinkled. At 7:30 I stood at the end of the Petrov Street and thought about leaving. Leaving is a skill. It requires nothing but the memory of other times you survived. I almost used it. Then Anna appeared on the balcony above the living room like a small saint in a folk painting, and saw me, and didn't wave because saints no one gestures cause Harmond turned and left the balcony door ajar. I walked to the service entrance and found it unlocked. The house was darker than before, not with malice, with consent. He had turned on only the lamp by the piano so that the instrument had its own weather. He was waiting with a page on the music stand and a pencil. And I loved him in that moment, the way one loves a stranger on a train you will never see again. For the fact of their existence and not its consequences. You came, he said, as if it were not already visible. I did. Anna entered quietly, in socks, carrying the hymn book we had made from laundry lists the week before. She sat and placed her fingers on the keys with a weight that acknowledged the gravity of them. He took the bench beside the window, not as a supervisor, as a witness. Begin, he said to her, not with the exercise, with the thing that wants to be born. She looked at me, and then at the keys, and then at him, and said, I don't know how. You do, I said, but your hands will not move until your mouth forgives them. I asked her to hum one note, the round one she kept trapped at the base of her throat. The one her teacher's ruler had trained into corners. She did. I asked for its neighbor. She found it. I asked her to put them together and tilt her head and listen until one wanted to stay. She smiled in the dark and pressed the same two on the piano. He exhaled. Something in the room altered, like a long floor settling back into its joists. We built a phrase the way you build a path through tall grass. 1 foot, then another, until the direction reveals itself as if it had been there always and only needed the courtesy of feet. Her right hand learned to be brave. Her left learned to be patient. He watched and did not correct her once. Outside, a car passed, then two, then none. The neighborhood slept, the lamp hummed. Time expanded enough to include us. We did not hear the key in the front door because we didn't know we should be listening for it. We did not hear the click of her heels because the carpet loves her feet in a way it does not love ours. We did not hear her breath sharpen until it broke the air like a glass. The lights came on. All of them, without mercy. We froze the way animals do when the forest decides a hunter has a right to it. What is this? Her voice asked the question the house was built to answer. Mr. Petrov stood, slowly, as if standing too quickly would frighten the truth away. A lesson, he said. In my house, she replied, which is 3 words that sometimes mean 10,000. Yes, he said. He had chosen which cowardice to disobey. He had made peace with the cost written on it. With my piano, she said. Yes? She looked at me then, and I saw the thing that frightens rich people most. The possibility that their power will not keep beauty from entering the room without their permission. You, she said, I told you to leave. She did, he said. I asked her to return. I would have taken the blame to spare him, but he had decided to spend his voice. She turned to Anna. Go upstairs. No, Anna said, and the word placed itself between her mother and the staircase like a small table that one must walk around now. I'm playing. You are finished. No, she said again, but softer and stronger. The way you say a word to a horse you love who wants to bolt. I am beginning. There are moments when a family recognizes itself, not as an arrangement of portraits, but as a group of people who will either change or die. This was one. Silence tall enough to look over the piano settled in. He took his wife's gaze and held it. Do you want a house with a piano no one plays? He asked, or a home where someone learns to be alive? She stared as if he had spoken a foreign language and then found, inside herself, the grammar that proved she once knew it too. The rules are there to protect the music, he said, not to bury it. She looked at me then, and I prepared my throat for the words that would require me to pack again. She surprised both of us. Out, she said, but not to me, to her own anger. She set it down like a bag she had been holding since her own mother put it in her hands. She sat, slowly, in the chair by the window and put her fingers to her temples like someone adjusting a crown they are tired of wearing. Play, she said to Anna. What you were playing, from the beginning. We did not move at first because the body must be convinced that danger has put down its knife. Then Anna placed her hands on the keys and the phrase returned, and this time it was not shy. It stood up. It walked around the room and touched the frames and climbed the stairs and kissed the chandelier and came back to us and said, Here I am. When it ended, no one clapped. We do not clap when the rain finally arrives. We simply hold out our hands and let it touch all the places that have been cracked. Mrs. Petrov stood. She walked to the piano. She did not look at me. She looked at the dustless keys. You will come tomorrow, she said. Her voice was not a knife now. It was a broom. You will teach her scales as if they were not punishments. You will teach her to listen, and you will not make my house small. She turned, met my eyes, and I saw the smallest door open behind hers. And you will take your wages for the week you were denied, she added, because the house owes what it breaks. I nodded because there was nowhere in my body to place words. I lifted my hands from my lap to say thank you and realized I was shaking now that I was safe. She saw it. She reached for a blanket that lives, unnoticed, at the end of the couch and set it on the bench beside me without touching me. It was the kindest thing she had done since the first day she had told me not to touch anything. Tomorrow at 4, she said, and left the room without looking back. the way people do when they are aware they have just changed and are embarrassed to be seen in transit. Mr. Petrov exhaled a laugh that had ashes in it and wiped at his eyes with his sleeve like a boy. I would like you to meet someone, he said, to both of us. Not now, but soon. There is a man who runs a small hall downtown. He is reckless. He lets children make mistakes with dignity. There is a piano there that is not a museum piece. If I ask, he will let us have it on Thursdays. He looked at me. Would you help me build a place where she can begin without being punished for it? I thought of the church, of the sign above the upright that said for prayer only. I thought of how prayer is just the most honest sound a person knows how to make. Yes, I said, if we can bring other children too. We must, he said, as if the word had always been waiting at the end of his sentence. Anna laid her cheek on the keys, very gently, so that only the slightest ghost notes answered. It sounds like home now, she whispered. I gathered my coat. It was past midnight when I stepped back into the cold. Snow was falling in a sane way, slow enough to notice, fast enough to matter. I walked to the end of the street and did not turn back because turning back is for people who have left something they need. I had been given something to carry. In my pocket, the card warmed against my palm as if it had a small heartbeat of its own. Behind me, in a house built from rules, a piano had remembered how to belong to the people in front of it. Ahead of me, the city did the only thing cities can do for refugees and music. It made a path if you were willing to put your feet down, one after the other, until the direction began to believe in you. For a few days after that night, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Mrs. Petrov moved more quietly, as if she feared startling the air she herself had broken. Mr. Petrov disappeared into his office, and Anna followed me from room to room as though silence were safer if two people carried it. I came at 4, as she had said, and each time the piano waited with its lid half open. No longer a threat, but a question. We worked in whispers. Anna's fingers learned courage the way children learn a language by accident, by listening. Sometimes Mrs. Petrov stood in the doorway with folded arms, pretending to read a letter while her eyes followed every motion of her daughter's hands. She no longer said again. She said nothing at all, and that nothing was a gift. After lessons, I stayed to polish silver or fold linen, work that keeps pride and fear occupied. I began to notice small mercies left where they hadn't been before. A cup of tea on the sideboard. A folded blanket near the chair where I waited for the tram. Once, when I dropped a glass and it shattered, no one shouted. Mrs. Petrov knelt with me, picked up the larger pieces, and said, "Some things break because they're ready to be cleaned." It was the closest she had ever come to confession. One evening, while Anna practiced alone, I stepped outside to the terrace for air. From there I could see the street lamps shining on the cars below, and in one of them my reflection in the window. Thin and tired, a maid holding her own ghost. That was when I heard the sound, a voice humming, soft and strange. It wasn't Anna, it was coming from upstairs. From the closed door of Mr. Petrov's study, the melody was incomplete. Like someone writing a letter without knowing how to end it. But I knew it. It was the theme he had played with me in the church, the 3-note prayer. I listened until it stopped, until I understood what he was doing, building a bridge back to the man he used to be. By the end of the week, the girl could play without the metronome. The house breathed differently. Even the servants smiled more easily. But the world outside remained the same cold, fast and unkind. The news on the radio spoke of borders and numbers again. And one morning, when I arrived, Mrs. Petrov met me with red eyes. "Anna is sick," she said. "A fever." I hurried upstairs. Anna lay curled on the couch, pale and sweating, her hand twitching as though playing invisible keys. I cooled her forehead with a cloth. She whispered, "The concert." "What concert?" I asked. "In school," she murmured. "They said only real musicians could play." Mama said no. Then she slept again. That evening, while the family ate in the dining room, I found the invitation on the piano. It was printed in gold ink. Winter Gala, Youth Performance Night. There was a space for one performer's name, blank. I stared at it until my reflection filled the paper. I thought of the church piano, of broken things becoming bridges. And then I wrote her name. When Mrs. Petrov found out, she didn't speak to me for 2 days. Then, on the 3rd, she came to the kitchen where I was peeling apples. "You wrote her name," she said. "Yes. Do you think she's ready?" "No one is ever ready for forgiveness," I said. "We just play until it arrives." She studied me, and then almost imperceptibly, "If she goes, she need a proper accompanist," she said. "You will play with her." I almost dropped the knife. "Me, you," she said. turning toward the door. "You started this song. You should help her finish it." The night of the concert arrived, dressed in snow. The hall was small but proud, a chandelier hanging like hope over the polished floor. Children in neat suits tuned their violins. Mothers fussed with bows and collars. I stood backstage with Anna, my hands cold and useless. She wore a blue dress and the expression of someone standing at the edge of something enormous. Mrs. Petrov appeared behind us, adjusting her daughter's hair. For a moment, she hesitated, then pressed a small brooch into my palm, a silver treble clef, old but shining. "It was mine," she said. For luck, it felt heavier than gold. When our names were called, the world became narrow, just the stage, the piano, and Anna's breathing. She began with a simple phrase, 2 notes, then 3. The melody we had built from the kitchen walls and whispered afternoons. I followed, shaping the air beneath her sound. At first, the audience shifted, curious, uncertain. Then they stilled. The music grew until it didn't belong to us anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to stay quiet. When the final chord faded, no one moved. Then, slowly, they rose. Applause rolled toward us like surf. Anna smiled at me, small but endless dot in the front row. Mr. Petrov's eyes were wet. His wife clapped once, twice, and then covered her mouth as if afraid her heart might fall out. Afterward, in the empty hall, he approached me. "You made them hear her," he said. "She did that herself," I replied. He shook his head. "No, you reminded us that talent is not owned, it is witnessed." Outside, the snow had stopped. The city lights scattered across the streets like spilled keys, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had not dared to name belonging. But before I left, he added quietly, "There's something you should know. That piece you played tonight, those 3 notes, they're older than this house. I heard them once, years ago, in Odessa. A girl played them in a music school that no longer exists. Her name was Helena." He paused. "Was that you?" I could only nod. He smiled, sorrow and wonder sharing the same face. Then this was never an accident. That night I walked home through the snow without feeling the cold. The sound of the piano stayed with me not as a burden, but as proof that even in exile, music can find its way back to its own language. I did not yet know that the performance would travel further than any of us imagined, or that the echo of that song would open a door none of us thought existed. The performance lingered in the air, long after the hall emptied. For days, its echo followed us. When I walked to the tram in the morning, I could still hear the applause. Faint but persistent, like a heart remembering how to beat after too much silence. The city had changed overnight. No, not the city, but how it looked to me. It no longer sneered. It listened. The next morning, a photograph appeared in the local newspaper. It showed Anna at the piano, her fingers mid-air, and me beside her, my face half in shadow. The caption read, "Prodigy and teacher, move audience to tears." The article spoke of a maid with extraordinary musical intuition, and how her guidance had awakened the dormant brilliance of a young pianist. They didn't print my name only, the Ukrainian Maid. Still, it was more acknowledgement than I had ever expected from a world that prefers its servants invisible. At the Petrov house, the phone rang for hours. Music schools, journalists, charitable societies all wanted to know the story behind the picture. Mrs. Petrov took every call herself. I expected anger. Instead, I heard her say, "Yes, yes, she still works here." And once, when someone asked whether it was true that her maid had been fired for touching the piano, she paused for a long moment before answering softly, "It was true, and it was wrong." That afternoon, as I folded sheets in the laundry room, Anna burst in with a letter clutched in both hands. "From Vienna," she said, almost breathless. The envelope was ivory, thick and official. Inside was a formal invitation embossed with gold. The European Youth Conservatory invites Miss Anna Petrov and her instructor, Miss Helena Kovalenko, to perform at the Winter Arts Gala. My breath stopped. They had written my name. Mrs. Petrov appeared in the doorway, still in her housecoat. She had been crying, I could see it. She took the letter from Anna, read it twice, and looked at me. "I didn't even know they knew your name," she said quietly. "Neither did I whispered. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a dry, fragile sound, the kind laughter makes when it hasn't been used in years. "Well," she said, "it seems they do now." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. The Petrov house was alive again, not with tension, but with music. The grand piano was tuned. Fresh flowers appeared in the living room every morning. Even the servants seemed to walk lighter. Mrs. Petrov bought Anna a new blue gown for the concert. And, to my shock, She also handed me a box. Inside was a simple black dress, elegant, modest, but clearly expensive. I thought you might need something suitable, she said, not meeting my eyes. Madam, it's not charity, she interrupted. It's an apology with fabric. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The night before the trip, Anna couldn't sleep. She came to the kitchen, where I was making tea, and sat on the counter, swinging her legs. Are you scared? She asked. Yes, I admitted. It's been a long time since I stood in front of people who were allowed to look at me. She thought about that. When I'm scared, Papa says to remember what you love more than fear. And what do you love? The sound right before the first note, she said, because in that second, anything is possible. I smiled. You'll do well. She shook her head. We'll do well. Vienna greeted us with snow and golden light. The concert hall was older than any house I'd ever cleaned. The walls seemed to hum with history. When we rehearsed, the piano responded like a living thing, each key a doorway to something larger than sound. Before the performance, backstage, Mrs. Petrov came to me. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted my sleeve. When I first saw you touch that piano, she said, I thought you were stealing something from us. I didn't understand you were giving something back. Her eyes shone, and for the first time, I saw the woman beneath the diamonds, a woman who had once believed she needed to build a fortress around her life, and had just realized it had also been a cage. Thank you, she whispered. Not for forgiving me, I said, for listening. When the lights dimmed and the audience hushed, Anna took the stage first. I followed. The first piece was hers, the same melody from the kitchen, reborn through better acoustics and cleaner keys. The second was mine, though she played it too, a composition I had written years ago in Odessa. Back when music still belonged to me, the notes rose like breath on a cold morning. The sound was both a confession and a prayer. When the last chord settled into silence, I realized my hands were shaking. Then came the applause, louder than before, longer, real, and when we stood to bow, I caught sight of Mr. Petrov in the audience, clapping with his whole heart. Beside him, Mrs. Petrov had tears running freely down her cheeks. Anna turned to me, her small hand finding mine. You see, she whispered, it sounds like home again. After the concert, people came to us with offers, music schools, scholarships, interviews, but I saw in Mrs. Petrov's face that she already understood what I would say. I would not stay in Vienna, not yet. This was never about being discovered. I told her later that night in the hotel lobby. It was about remembering that we exist. She nodded. Then at least promise me you'll never hide again. I promise. On the flight home, Anna fell asleep with her head on my arm. I looked out the window, at the faint glow of stars over the clouds. Somewhere far below, my old country was buried in snow, but the world no longer felt so cold. For the first time since leaving Ukraine, I thought of the word return and didn't flinch, because return isn't always about geography. Sometimes it's about sound, finding the note that makes you belong again. When we returned to the city, winter had already begun to fade. The snow along the gutters was gray and tired, the kind that no longer wanted to be remembered as beautiful. But something inside the Petrov house had changed permanently. The coldness that once lived between its walls had melted into something softer. The sound of chairs being pulled closer, of laughter echoing in places where silence used to guard the doors. Mrs. Petrov no longer gave orders. She gave questions. Helena, would this color suit the sitting room? Anna, should we play that piece again for your father after dinner? Even her footsteps had lost their rhythm of command. It was as if the house itself had been tuned differently. And every day we lived inside a new key, that the newspaper story from Vienna had spread further than any of us expected. One morning, a thick envelope arrived at the house. Inside were letters handwritten, from strangers. One read, I used to play the violin before the war. My hands shake now, but after reading about you, I took it out again. Another, my daughter stopped her lessons when her teacher said she'd never be good enough. She wants to try again. Mrs. Petrov read each one aloud at the kitchen table. Then she said quietly, perhaps this is what success looks like, not applause, but the courage we borrow and give back. A week later, Mr. Petrov called us into the living room. He had been working on something, sheets of music scattered across the piano, a pencil tucked behind his ear. I've written a piece, he said, almost shyly. For whom? I asked. For all of us, he said. It's called House of Sound. I thought maybe we could play it together. Anna gasped. All three of us. He nodded. Yes, 3 hands for the same song. We spent hours that day trying, laughing, failing, beginning again. Sometimes he would hum, sometimes I would correct a rhythm, and sometimes Mrs. Petrov would appear with tea and pretend not to be listening when her foot tapped in time. When we finally played it through, every note fragile but alive, I realized that I no longer felt like an employee. I felt like a witness to something rare, forgiveness becoming a language that could be heard. The next week, Mr. Petrov invited me to a small event at the community center. He had been funding a program there quietly for years, piano lessons for children who could not afford them. But after Vienna, he wanted to open the doors wider. "Would you help me run it?" he asked. Me. I said, startled, "Yes, they need someone who knows what it means to lose and find music again." I accepted without thinking, because I had already been dreaming of such a place. Somewhere where children could play without fear of breaking the rules or the silence. We called it the Open Keys Project. Every Thursday, children from every corner of the city came: Polish, Ukrainian, Syrian, Roma, each carrying a different accent of hope. Some came barefoot, some shy, some loud. None of them cared about perfect posture or expensive instruments. They just wanted to be heard. Anna came to. She didn't call me Miss Helena anymore. She called me teacher, sometimes even friend. One afternoon, I was tidying up after class when I noticed Mrs. Petrov standing quietly by the door. She looked around at the children, the mismatched benches, the battered old piano. "It's not beautiful," she said, gesturing to the cracked paint, the uneven lighting. "It's perfect," I said. "It's a home." She smiled faintly. "Do you remember the first day I met you?" "I remember every word," I said. "So do I," she murmured. "I wish I didn't." "You've already rewritten it," I said. She took my hand then, a small gesture, but one the old her would never have allowed. "Thank you for not hating me," she whispered. "I did," I said honestly, "but I decided the music needed both of us to finish the song." Her eyes shone, but she only nodded. "Then let's keep playing." Months passed. The world didn't become kinder, but we became stronger inside it. The Open Keys Project grew. A local newspaper wrote an article calling me the maid who taught the city to listen. I laughed when I read it, because I was no longer a maid, and the city had been ready to listen long before it realized it. One evening, as the sun set pink across the windows, Mr. Petrov gathered us all in the hall. He had something to say, he explained, and he wanted the children to hear it too. He cleared his throat and looked around. "This hall," he said, "was once a storage room. I kept boxes here, documents, contracts, things that didn't sing. But music came and claimed it. So, from this day, it belongs to her." He looked at me, to Helena, for everything she gave us back. He handed me a small brass key, not symbolic, real. For the front door, the children clapped without understanding the weight of it, and I stood there, trembling, the key biting softly into my palm. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the piano. The room was dim, except for a single candle. I placed the key on the music stand and played quietly. Not a piece from Vienna, not one of Mr. but something new. A melody built from footsteps, from old languages, from the sound of broom bristles and teacups, and quiet forgiveness. A song without borders. Halfway through, Anna slipped back into the room. "Can I play too?" she asked. I nodded. She sat beside me, and together we finished it. When the final note faded, she whispered, "Mama says the house feels lighter when you're here." I smiled. "It's not me, it's the music." She thought about that, then shook her head. "No," she said softly, "it's you." A year later, a small concert was held in the same hall, our hall. Children performed, parents cried, reporters came and forgot to take notes because their throats were too full. At the end, the three of us, Anna, Mr. Petrov and I, played House of Sound. The room swelled with warmth and memory. When the last chord settled, I looked up and saw Mrs. Petrov standing near the door, her hands clasped, her face wet but smiling. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I think it was "thank you," and I understood then that I had finally come home, not to a country, but to a sound. After everyone left, I locked the door, held the brass key in my palm, and whispered a prayer for all the women who had been told they were too poor, too foreign, too silent to matter. "Play anyway," I said. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive in applause or headlines. Sometimes, it's in the moment you realize that the hands once forbidden to touch beauty have become the hands that shape it. And when I pressed one final note, low, soft, steady, the world outside seemed to listen. Not with pity, with respect,